Hello, Denise Blake. I'd like to introduce Kathleen Coady and her stories. Childhood living with her family in England, working as an adult, moving home to Inishowen with her family, miscarriages and having children, adult education and how she got there, helping to set up Clonmany Community Centre, resilience, and all with such a wonderful turn of phrase. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
So, Kathleen Coady in Clonmany.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Where were you born?
I was born actually right here where I'm sitting.
Seriously?
Yeah, I was born here in 1944 and went to England in the early to mid 50s. And I went to school here for the first few years. And then in 1974, exactly 30 years later, I came back from London and we built this house on the place where both myself and my brother were born, and my father. So this is yeah.
So you went at what age were you when you went to England first?
We went twice. I was 8, I think, the first time. England then, London in particular, was a very bad place, not a very nice place. I wouldn't say a bad place. I would say not a very nice place for Irish people at that time.
Funny, that's coming up in interviews a lot.
Is it? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. Well, it was I wasn't aware of it, but it was a no Irish, no pets. There wasn't a problem at that time with Black people because they hadn't really started to come into England until, I suppose, the mid to late 50s. But my mother and father had a small house that they were renting, and then the landlord found out that they had children and they were told to leave. So
and how many
how many
children?
Two. Two. So we were brought home and left with my grandparents. I think for about 18 months to 2 years.
Your memories of that?
Sorry?
Your memories of that, of being left?
Oh yeah, and I wasn't unhappy because my grandparents were wonderful people. So I wasn't. I suppose really and truly we had left. I had friends. We were in England for I don't know how long. It wasn't very long, and then I got to come back to my friends.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the turmoil that my parents would have been going through. So my parents, the road they lived in, my mother had made a friend there, and it turned out that her father had flats to let. They weren't great places, but they were something. And so my mother got one of those, and we were then reunited, and we lived in that very basic conditions for a long time up until I got married. Up until I got married.
Did you marry an Englishman or an Irishman?
Pardon?
Marry an Englishman or an Irishman or?
Tipperary.
Tipperary.
Yeah.
Well, that counts.
Yeah. It might have been a dance hall. He was in the band, and that was it.
Lovely. He was in the band.
Yeah, he was in the band.
Oh, lovely.
So, he said he always wanted to live in Donegal, so he got his opportunity when he met me, and that probably was the drawing factor. But no, it's yeah, it was. Then we came back here in 1974. I worked in England. We saved different times. I had a very good job. I was personal. I worked in publishing, and I was a personal assistant to the managing director, so the owner, and training as an editor. So I had a fairly good job, but we saved enough to build this house in 2 years. We lived on. My husband was a musician, and he was an electrician as well during his daytime, and so we lived on his money, and we saved all of mine. But young couples couldn't have a hope to do that now in these days.
Yeah.
They couldn't. I don't think they could save for the deposit in 2 years.
Yeah.
It's an awful situation that we've gradually grown towards, like,
And people were able to build their house with their money, like they didn't need mortgages,
No, we never had a mortgage, and we built it's a bungalow, very basic, 3-4 bedrooms. We had the land, obviously, because it belonged to my parents, but we built a very good house, and it's still standing, still in perfect condition.
Yeah.
Well, I say perfect condition. I've sewn all my life, and I had 6 kids, so it's it's in that kind of condition, but it's still standing, and there were no shortcuts. I know that people came out and helped us when we came home, and we were going to do that, but I just look at my own family, and they've all had to take out mortgages, which is a commitment for 20, 25, sometimes 30 years,
Yeah.
a large commitment, it's
Definitely.
yeah.
And depending where you live in too, it's
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we live in Donegal, we live in a rural area, and I have a son in Galway at the moment, but their mortgages are local here in Donegal. But I mean, it is worrying. It is
so
because there's grandchildren. Then what's it going to be?
Yeah, definitely. So you obviously gave up a good job when you came home.
Yes.
And how did you feel? How did you find that?
I found when I came home, I also was a sewer. I was a dressmaker, and my parents and my grandmother and my great-grandmother were all dressmakers. And so in London, I lived in Shepherd's Bush, which is the very central of London. You could go, if you ran out of something, you could leave you could leave your machine on and run down the road, get it, and that was it. But then the publishing company I worked in was alternative way of living too. And they were interested in healing and country life and organic and all of that. So
ahead of its time?
Oh, way, way, way ahead of their time. So they would have been encouraging in a way,
Yeah.
When I left they equipped me with every kind of book you could think of,
lovely.
on gardening, on baking, on everything. So, and they visited when I first came here. They came to visit. They're both sadly gone now, but they're gone for a good while now. But yeah, it was that was the most difficult thing. And I was somebody that did like going to theatre.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big cinema goer, but I did. My brother-in-law lived quite close to me, and we quite often together went to the. There was a new alternative cinema in Edgware Road, and we used to go there to plays. You know, where the stage was the floor and the audience was a circle and seats around it. So that was, I missed that. I missed that big time.
And I think it is difficult when someone comes home like that. You can't be saying to everyone here, "Oh, I miss the theatre," or they'd be saying, "Who does she think she is?"
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, you did have to be careful. But there was a very strange thing when we first came back. I had never been involved with the dole or unemployment situations. I started work at 13 to put myself, because you had to work to bring in money so you could go to college or go to whatever, you know, you had to keep working. And so I'd always worked. And my father and mother was, my mother, when she wasn't sewing, worked in the canteen for Mike Alpine's Fusiliers, the building company, construction. But we, when I came back, people thought you had this extra knowledge, you know, and they would ask you about filling in forms and things like that, which you didn't have.
Yeah.
And people would be very amazed, you know, when you would say, "Oh, I don't really know what's required there," because you didn't want to put them in a position where you were doing them harm.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you did have to be careful about not being uppity, you know.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't fair. It wouldn't be fair, like, you know. But yeah, sometimes it's strange to think back in those days, like, you know.
Yeah, my parents, when they married, moved to America for a while, and then we came back then 1970. You know, you love it, but it's
yeah. It's now my parents it was always in their agenda. It was always on their agenda that they would be coming back to Ireland. It wasn't always on my agenda. It wasn't always part of my agenda, because I was quite happy where I was. But then when they decided to come back, we all talked about it. And so they asked us, would we come back to where we're living now? And my husband was, I suppose, much more for it than I was at that time, because he liked that kind of he thought he liked the kind of country life, you know. So, but yeah, it was they came back in 1973 and we came back in 74.
Yeah. And then you had 6 of a family?
I had 6, yeah. I had quite a few miscarriages when I came back. But I eventually, my grandmother bought me a holy statue.
Are you joking?
No, I'm deadly serious.
To put at the end of
Oh, my beautiful grandmother. And she came up with this lovely statue of, I think it was Saint Anthony. My son and daughter-in-law have it now, because she brought it up and she said to me, just keep that with you and everything will be all right.
Gosh.
And Oisin was born. So
They wouldn't have, you wouldn't have been able to talk about it that much at the time, I'm sure. You know, it was just,
no. You certainly wouldn't talk about those kind of things with the like of my grandmother.
yeah.
Oh, she was a very her family had actually emigrated to America. She was born in America, and she came back here when she was very young. But now my mother was a different kettle of fish. She belonged to that era, but at the same time, she was quite broad-minded and open-minded, and
Yeah.
that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were never denied conversation. You know, we were
Yeah.
never denied conversation.
That's a lovely way to put it. Lovely. Way to put it. We were never right, you know. Yeah. Lovely. So you were home, were you dressmaking in those years or?
In the first years we came home, yes, I was dressmaking locally, and ended up on Gay Burns show and Live at 3
Very good.
with different things, yeah. And yeah, it and was on the radio a few times, and did a few magazine things. And
Was it for design, because you designed the clothes or?
I did bridal wear, which is always, yeah.
Yeah.
I did mostly bridal wear and mother of the bride stuff, and yeah, it was. So that was a nice period. But around the late 80s, we started then doing. I was on the school committee from the time I came home. I was on the school committee, I suppose, for close on, must have been 20 years altogether. Because there was a big gap with my children, you know, and but I started then doing. My father was always involved in voluntary work. The local football team, the Shamrocks, were his absolute pride and joy. He loved them, and if they were playing on a Sunday, you better have a good excuse of why you weren't there supporting, like, you know. But and then the other one was Chelsea. But we started then looking about a youth club, because there was an awful lot. A lot of people had come back, which was strange because it was the 80s and we'd had a recession, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, people don't normally return to recession.
A lot left in the 80s too, you know, but
It was a strange time. But we started a youth club. We started talking to people in 88, and then we started fundraising. And the first meeting of the youth club took place on the eve of St. Bridget on 1989. And it's going ever since. So we ended up putting up a building, and it's been kind of the love of my life for the last many years.
For you too, to have this project and to have everything, to use your best ability, you know.
Oh, it was, yeah. And it drove me in a different direction as well, because I had done art when I was in England, and my art was into design and dress design and that. But when we started youth work here, there was no funding. There was none of that stuff. And then if you wanted to put up a building, which we did, there was so many things you had to know. Working with young people, there was so many things you had to know. So they start the powers that be somewhere started to bring out things like community development and rural development, and so I did both. I did community development in Magee, and I did rural development in Galway.
And I heard you used to thumb down to Galway. You used to hitch down to Galway.
No, I used to drive down. I'd leave here on a Friday night for a Saturday morning class, 4 o'clock in the morning, and drive down for 10 o'clock and stay overnight, and then drive back Sunday night. And I always got there absolutely spot on. And every time I drove home, literally every time, I got lost in the same place. That is a sign of real serious super intelligence, but because it's not easy to do.
No.
But I enjoyed that. And
wonderful, just going into Magee and then going into UCG. You know,
going into Magee was a bit difficult. I had also gone to the tech in Letterkenny. Gone to the tech in Letterkenny, and some of the people on the committee were builders, and I used to get a lift up with them in their with all the building men going to work 6:30 in the morning, 7 o'clock, and come down on the bus. But going into Magee was different. I used to drive into Carndonna, which is, I don't know where you're based.
Ramelton.
Where?
Ramelton.
Ramelton.
Yeah.
Well, I used to drive into Carndonna and get the bus to Derry. And that was easy, but the Troubles were on at the time. It was in the middle of the Troubles.
Yeah.
And it wasn't hostility, but some of the tutors now, not all of them, I think we come up against 2, were not best disposed towards adult
interesting
students. And we had a couple of standoffs. Then we had other wonderful tutors who were absolutely fantastic. Fantastic.
And now they say that they love to have adult learners coming in because they really want to be there.
Yeah, just I think one person in particular thought that we were just a waste of time.
Gosh.
That because we were 40 or 50,
female.
What were we going to do with this thing? But of course, we were all taking it back to our communities, because we were pushed within the community. Then you were pushed into, because EU funding was in then.
Yeah.
And there was this strange thing with EU funding was the language.
Yeah.
I can't remember any of it now. I'm sure I've got papers with it on somewhere. And so what we used to do is write out an application and then put in the EU language.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't been using words. I mean, and I don't mean like socializing, but we hadn't been using the kind of language that's used for high level funding and high level government stuff.
Filling out forms is a skill on its own. you know,
Yes,
I hated it.
yes. At the EU forms were 30 pages long, like, you know, they were ridiculous, but we all got through it, and we all kind of grew up together here. Even though we were mature students, we kind of grew up together here in Inishowen, because we were isolated from, we had been isolated from the north for years, and then when the troubles were on, we were isolated even more.
And I think sometimes it actually makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. You know,
Yes,
if we were in Dublin, we would sit back and let them sort it out for us. But I think in Donegal, you do it or it doesn't happen.
that's true. That's true. You are braver in the defense of other people.
Yeah.
There's a strange thing about, and it happens in all communities, but I can only talk about Clonmany. Within Clonmany now, if we are working for Clonmany, we work ferociously and work as a group, as a team. We may not even like each other, or we may, do you know,
Yeah.
but at the back of it is that principle that your place of home comes first, because if it's not in good condition, then the family has to suffer, you know, the people have to suffer. So yeah, there was another thing too in those days, and that is that the people that govern us were easier to be in touch with.
Yeah.
We
Well, everything,
Dr.
the phones, electricity, you know, you just phoned up and said, you know, my aunt was
Yes,
Joe McGlinchey up the road, you know, just the bank
they
man.
were. Yeah, it was, and that's sad, because when we were fighting to build the center down there, which is a fantastic center, we could pick up the phone and talk to our TDs and our ministers. Dr. McDade, Jim McDade never left around here, you know, and if he was passing, he called in.
You called in.
Do you know? We had so many people come into the centre who were in senior positions in government.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't just us. They did this in other areas as well. But that's gone.
Yes.
That's gone. That's gone. There has to be a disaster or something major happening before you see, almost before you see your own politicians.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is a shame, because I think what's happened is, you know, I think what's happened is that they are removed from the people on the ground.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
their experience of what people on the ground are experiencing
Or
has been,
people would help you with funding, would say you filled out the wrong form, but this is the form, but that, you know.
yeah, yeah. Oh, they guide you in a way. I mean, you would be told, look, there's sports partnership are bringing out funding I think would suit you. If you know anybody else that will benefit from this, give them a shout.
Yeah.
And that is what you did, you know, that's what you did. And it was like they were your friend,
Yeah.
you know. Now it feels almost that you're very lucky if you have somebody like that that will
It's all bureaucratic now.
yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame, because I think it's government loses out, because if you have 20 people in your government that are in touch with their community on a first name level, and that they don't have to think who that person is, they know what that community is doing. I think it makes for better government. I
Yeah.
think it makes for, you know, I'm talking about something, but I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because I know who they are.
Yeah.
Do you know? I just think we've lost that.
Yeah.
I think we've
So
lost
with
that.
the community center, like how many are a lot of people using it, I would say.
or we would have, I wouldn't know what the footfall is now for the year, but it would be several thousands. It is used by, I would say, by everybody in the community. And now I was there until the end of 2017 as manager. But I know that a new thing has started since then. We always had childcare, and we had youth club, and we had women's groups and so forth. And we got serious money to put up a craft teaching centre. But now they do an after school, they have an after school club, which is fantastic. The children come in from school, they have a meal, and they do their homework, they have a recreational time, and then they get something light to eat before time's up, but they're there, and they even have a breakfast club if that's needed. It's fantastic, fantastic. Now that is funded by the government, obviously, but
somebody had to set it up. Somebody had to create this. I mean,
yeah,
it's best.
yeah, it is fantastic. Now the center is it is just fantastic. It's a fantastic place.
And funny, you're probably a politician with a small p.
Don't know about that.
That you got the things done, obviously, you know.
We did. We have myself and another chap are founder members, and we were still involved in it. We're still involved in the centre. But there has always been a great committee. For some reason, a committee that listens and is supportive of what's going on in the centre, which is tremendously important to the people that are working there.
Here sometimes the people say the first thing on the agenda for the committee meeting is the split.
Yeah.
Many split, and obviously that your committee.
No, it's a fantastic committee, and it is actually what's needed if you want to have a good community centre. Or community organization or whatever. You've got to have a good, not necessarily a working committee. There's all sorts of ways of working. There's ideas, that's working. There's supporting the staff and the manager in particular, that's working. There's then actually doing the work, going out and fundraising and that. So we have a committee that falls into all those sections. They don't interfere, never interfered, and they're not the same committee now as they were. Only some of them are, but many of them are long term. There
must be a great trust in you. They must have great belief in you as a person,
Well, they did, yeah. I had, yeah, they had. But then
you were the woman.
They knew.
Yeah.
That was next to my family. I suppose that was the most important thing in my life, So yeah, they did, and. My daughter is a manager now, and I think they're giving her the same support. She's doing great work down there.
The gift you've given to your grandchildren, even, that this is there.
Yeah, well, 2 of them are in community.
Yeah.
They, well, I suppose. Do you know what? If you needed the job doing and you didn't have time to go out and look for somebody else, you dragged in one of your own.
Yeah.
Do you know? And I had 6 of them, so it was bound to rub off on some.
Yeah.
When we did our development plan for the building of the centre. My son, who did community development in Galway, my oldest son, he did the development plan for the centre, and as it turned out, our church was having work done, so the building was up,
Yeah.
but the development plan for running the centre, for further developing it, and so they used the church as the centre as a church.
Oh,
They've done that a few times. When they ran a big mission, they used the centre for the missions, but they used it. And so when we did the questionnaire for the development plan, we left it in the church as a way, because everybody went to church like then.
yeah.
And the priest just got up on the altar and said, we need all of those back in for next Sunday. Can anybody bring their development? So we had about a 95% return on the, which is unheard of. But yeah, so it started off really as the centre started off as being always involved with the whole community. We had a fantastic priest. We've had a few fantastic priests in Killarney, but Father Farrell loved Killarney, loved the people, and loved the centre. And so any visitor that he had was given a tour of the centre to show them what the wonderful people in Killarney had done. And, you know, that didn't do us any harm.
No.
You know, that didn't do us any harm. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in goodness.
You're spiritual.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
My Father Farrell, he looks out for me anyway, so he's retired now, but yeah, wonderful man.
And a powerful woman.
I can ramble on.
Oh, you're not. No, you're not. No, it's very interesting. It's very, and it's all important things. This community, you know, it's
Well, community is incredibly important, because when you're talking to other people, it's easy for people to fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
But if people are talking, it's much easier to shore up those cracks so that people can walk on the surface, you know? If people are not talking in their communities and are not interacting with each other, and we've seen it now with this pandemic. There's fantastic stuff going on here in Killarney now. I'm isolated because of my age, but there's tremendous stuff going on, food banks and making sure people are being fed, and making sure that food is not wasted, you know, and the supermarkets are working with the manager in the centre, with Baven, and it's absolutely fantastic, because it's something I always hated, was the idea of food waste.
Yeah.
When I was brought up with being whispered on my ear, eat up all your greens, eat up what's on your plate, because there are people in Africa going hungry. You know? And
that's a lovely, what you said, shore up the cracks so people can walk on the surface. You have a lovely turn of phrase.
Oh,
I would say there's a memoir in you.
Pardon?
There's a few things you've said that I nearly wanted to jot down. You have a lovely turn of phrase. You should write a memoir. Seriously.
I read a lot.
Yes.
I'm a fanatical reader.
You've said a few things that I was sorry I you know, you have a lovely turn of phrase. Definitely, you have to get you start writing the memoir. Seriously. But because there's so much in that knowledge, there's so much, you know, you have the education and the experience, the knowledge.
Yeah, I think, you see, there is a funny thing here, and it probably happens to people who are in other areas as well, that you get involved in a community. We grew up in London, being now to be quite honest, even though a few times I personally came up against some, what would they call it now? They call it hate, whatever. My mother used to call it just stupidity.
Yeah.
And we were always sent out into the world to believe that we were no better than anybody else, but
no.
we were just as good.
Yeah.
And we came from Ireland, and we were Irish, and we were proud of it. And that was in an area. I grew up in Paddington, which was a fairly rough area, very working class, and we were poor, but you learned. It's not that you learned to fight for yourself, but you learn to value yourself.
Yeah.
And you learn to value your background, not in a romantic way. You learn to value it in a very practical way. Because if you weren't proud of it, if I wasn't proud of me or proud of where I came from, then I wasn't proud of my grandparents, who I loved very much.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or people that I went to school with that I cared a lot about, like, you know. So I think you have that, and I think community actually brings that out in you if you've had it, you know. My father would have been always involved in football, and in he was always a mad Chelsea man, and he worked for a company called Celotex, which made prefabricated board. And you lived in America, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know the way they have this family, the company. Well, we were treated like that, you see. And they brought in all the children. All their children were brought in at Christmas for a party. But what it did, a strange thing it did, and Easter, we got an Easter egg, and you know, different things. The children of the employees were looked after because they were part of the family. We kept hearing this, like, you know, and but that was actually something that is actually community.
Yeah.
You know. And I was experiencing that when I was very, very young, and my father was experiencing that kind of an attitude when he first. This is him first going to England and us going to England, and I think that built certain principles within us, that you were part of something bigger.
Yeah.
You're part of that, and you looked after it.
Yeah.
You looked after it, you know. And I think that's where the whole community, my whole community ethos would have come from as well.
Yeah.
Not that I learned to do it from that, because that was something, you know, hard times, and then somebody looks after you. It's like a fairy godmother, you know. But when you come into then back and into the real world, you've grown up, you've got children, and you start, because in the 80s there was a recession, things were poor here. You start building on what you experienced.
Yeah.
And I think we had quite a few people come into the area at that time, at the one time, and they were all had the same.
Yeah.
They wanted to give back this
Yeah.
thing to where they came from,
Yeah.
you know. And it was a great time to be here. Now,
Yeah.
had I had a different upbringing in London, and had I had a different upbringing, I don't know, would I have been doing the same? I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't answer that, like, you know.
But it's wonderful because how something leads on to something that you don't expect, you know, and obviously brought out strengths in you,
Yeah,
you know, the
yeah,
talents that you have, that, you know, obviously,
yeah,
but, you know,
yeah. And it's sometimes, you know, when you've had a lot of experiences, it's something to do, to sit back and ponder on. And I suppose I'm fortunate enough in that I have loved what I've done.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
always loved what
yeah,
I've done. I've loved where I came from. There isn't a part of my life that I would say I wouldn't want to experience that. You know, I know when I first came back, I had a couple of miscarriages, and that was unpleasant. But sometimes those things they help to kind of build your character or build your, you know, and I met some interesting people during those experiences. But yeah, I look at myself and I think that I've had a lucky life. I just like somebody now to come and do my garden and
yeah.
clear up the outside.
How are you finding how are you finding this past year? Or
Well, first off, because we have the craft centre, we had a fabric shop, which was just really, I suppose, at that stage, getting established. And Baven come up with this idea of somebody in our women's group, first off, somebody in our women's group was working in a care centre and they had no masks, they had no PPE. So she asked, would we make some masks? So we did that. And then, of course, other people heard, and it, you know, it was like a Chinese whisper. It went all the way around, all
yeah,
over the place, you
yeah,
know. And so Baven just came up with the idea that we would make up a load of masks, and there was a group of people on motorbikes, and they would deliver them. They were out, they wanted a reason to be out on their motorbike, so they became delivery boys, and they delivered, communicated between the different groups, like, and delivered masks to, like, a St. James's and St. Luke's hospitals and all over the country. We made thousands upon thousands of masks. And so I did all the cutting. And then it went to different women and they did the sewing. We put them in packs and the women would pick up a pack of maybe 50 and they would take them home and sew them. Fantastic women. And then there were groups of women got together down the country, as far away as Wexford and Wicklow and Dublin. And so these people that were on bikes would, somebody local would deliver them so far, and then they would, it was a tremendous, so I was doing that right up until, I suppose, right up until we started to get enough PPE into the country, like, you know. So that kept me really busy and really focused, and it kept the other women who were sewing, it kept them busy and focused as well.
yeah,
And now recently I've not done so much, but my daughter was home for when the restrictions lifted at Christmas. My son-in-law, who lives in Indonesia with my daughter, they came home to see his mother because she was very, very ill. Wasn't well. And they came home. And then my daughter came up to see me. And then he went back to Indonesia and she got stuck here.
Oh, no.
The thing came down. Yeah.
No.
And Indonesia wasn't letting anybody back in. And so she was here then for 8 weeks.
Oh.
So she's only just gone last week. So she's in Jakarta at the moment in isolation in a hotel room. And in a few days, she'll be able to go on to where they live. So it's now the next few months that are going to be probably difficult, because that's taken up all the time. And I know we are still making masks, but we're only making a few.
Yeah.
We're only making a few. So it's tough. It's actually really tough being isolated. I love reading and I love sewing. I haven't done much sewing in the last while, and I love things like embroidery and that. But for anybody that has no hobby, my house is chaos because I have fabric in everywhere and books. I have books everywhere. And I have material everywhere. But they're all part of something that I can do.
Yeah.
And then my son and them come up, and they will. I have a daughter in Derry who and her husband and their child who are in a bubble. They don't visit anybody, so they come to visit, and they can come in freely into the house. If they do anything, then they stay away for the 14 days. And my other grandchildren, God love them, they come and they look they look in the window at the performing.
Well, we have that experience at the start of this.
But they're fantastic. They're fantastic. I have great grandchildren, but they are fantastic children, and they're considerate, and and they're kind. But for Mother's Day now, my son and my daughter came in, and my son-in-law, but their children, because there's too many of them, were all outside. protesting, but still. They all would have had a choice. They could have stayed at home, so they didn't. So no, they're nice people.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to be surrounded by nice people.
Yeah.
Well,
that didn't happen by accident.
Well, no, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know. It's not easy. It's not easy now to bring up children.
No.
Much more difficult. I think my generation probably were the last, I wouldn't say to have an easy time, but our problems were financial, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The problems young parents have today are so much more than financial. Yes, they have financial problems because of mortgages and school and education and everything. But
it's not
drugs and
when you say
the internet is a massive danger. I often say to people, when my oldest daughter and son, and even some of the older ones, the younger ones, like when they were younger, you were frightened of them getting knocked down on the road. That was your fear. I don't think that's anybody a parent's fear now.
Oh
Do you
no.
know?
Yeah, no.
Not as a fear, as in, you know, what you're thinking about, like, you know,
Yeah,
the dangers now are
yeah.
serious, and that's a and that's a
Much
big
darker,
difference
a
to,
much darker, you know, it comes from a different place. You know, evil's not quite the right word, but it's a much darker thing.
yeah, yeah. It's I don't think it's anything. I don't think it's something that my generation now can deal with. You know, it's not something that we can deal with. We were never. We brought about this situation of technology, and I mean, we were all gripped with the trips to the moon and all that, you know, not knowing that when all this technology became available to people on the ground, that it was going to change our lives, you know. Um,
And funny at the same time, it's wonderful to have it at the minute.
some
Even
of the things,
you know,
some of the things that it's done, I
yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
saves lives,
yeah,
but it's just that the people living with it have to be different to
yeah,
my generation,
yeah,
you
definitely.
know.
Yeah,
They have skills that, and I don't mean how to fix a laptop or anything, but they have skills of dealing with life that
mm,
my generation doesn't have,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Um, and couldn't possibly have, because we didn't have those things. We didn't even have electric typewriters, for God's sake,
Yeah,
until,
yeah.
you know,
Or the
the late 60s.
telephone, you know.
Newspapers to wrap your chips in, like, you know. And
My
yeah.
grandparents' phone number was letter Kenny 32. That was the phone number, you know.
Yeah, it was a totally different
Yeah.
world.
I
So
suppose,
it is a more dangerous, world now. It's a much more dangerous world now, but we're able to take a much bigger part in what's going on in the world,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know. We were never, in my younger generation, we definitely were not citizens of the world.
yeah,
You know, we were, um, I think the first time we got dragged into that maybe was when Kennedy was shot,
yes,
you know.
yeah,
Um, Before that, like, you know, we got glimpses of it on the TV, because the televisions were black and white in those days. Um, but you just, it didn't, it didn't impact on you
yeah,
at all. And you know what happened in Africa, we got from the messenger, you know, the little red book
yeah.
my granny used to get. And um, it was different. We're not now, people are concerned about they're concerned at moments in their everyday life of what's happening in Syria, and, you know, and places so far away that
And the flip of that is that we were watching China and what was happening in China and not realizing it was coming our way.
yes,
No,
yes.
you know,
I am very involved with the local tug of war team. Now, I say very involved. I am not involved at all,
yeah,
but I have to. If there's the man who's tug of war fanatic happens to cut my grass, and is a long time friend. But so anytime he needs any paperwork done, I get that happy job.
yeah,
And when we built the centre, they were the first people to give us money. They
mhm,
give us the first £1,000, which was a fortune then, towards building the centre. But we had the World Championships, Indoor Tug of War World Championships in Letterkenny 2020, last year, at the beginning of the pandemic. And we had people from Taiwan, we had pullers from Italy, which was going berserk weeks later. Had we been a week or two later for the World Championships, it couldn't have happened. Couldn't have happened. And so everybody was in the panic thinking, oh my God. But it was the best World Championships ever. They got great praise for what went on. But within weeks of that, Italy was closed down. Italy was in a really bad way, you know, and we were concerned about Italy. We were concerned about China years ago.
No.
Read it and it would have gone. But now, that's the difference now between people, you know, that we were concerned about the people that were here and had returned, you know. It's different world.
Yeah.
It is a considerably different world. And I don't know, will there be as much of a difference between now and the next 40 years, 50 years? I'd love to be around to see it, but unfortunately.
But then I always say that, like, when in the 60s and 70s, how we thought it would be by now, completely different.
Yeah.
We're still dressing the same nearly, you know.
Yeah.
We thought we would be flying in the air like the Jetsons nearly.
It was it was a different world, and we would never have thought that. I mean, when what was it, in 69 they went to the moon? I think. That was pure magic.
Yeah.
We all sat up in London I was married at the time, and we sat up watching it all night because of the time difference. And you know, television, you only had certain amount of hours, so there had to be special allowances made for this nighttime television. That was pure magic, but none of us imagined that the magic would come to what we have today. That who was I watching last night on the Late Late Show? And he had said, Paddy Malloy. Is it Maloney or Malloy?
Yeah.
From the Chieftains. I love the Chieftains. He sent a whistle and something else up, and it went around in space. I mean, what a weird thing, like, you know. But somebody took it up. A scientist took it up for him, and and he played a tune. I don't know whether it was the same whistle. I presume he's got it probably in a showcase somewhere now. So, but it's strange the way things have gone. I remember in 1972, my boss had to have the best of everything. I've told my kids, they're fed up listening to this story, but he had to have the best of everything. And in those days, if you made a mistake when you were typing anything, you had this piece of chalk paper and you put it in behind the mistake and you typed the mistake. So if you typed a B instead of a D, you put this paper in and you typed the B and it covered the B in white, and then you could type your D. But it was so messy. And if it goes out from a publishing company, you couldn't, it was desperate. So he came back from some kind of trade fair and he says, I have got you something now. He said, it's absolutely brilliant. and it was a word processor.
Oh,
So you could backspace and change your letter and then type the front. Perfect. And the screen was the size of a matchbox, well, maybe a large matchbox, but I mean, when you think of it now, that was actually in 1972
yeah,
or 71.
yeah,
And that is massive, massive, uh, massive changes
yeah.
when you think of.
Or even my husband worked for the Donegal County Council, and for our first computer, the council bought a whole bunch of computers, and then they let us pay so much out of his wages every week, and a lot of people got them that time because we couldn't have had one.
No, oh no,
You know,
they were outrageous. I mean, they were unbelievable price.
yeah.
No, it's
They
just,
paid so much, took off the wages every week, which was lovely,
yeah, yeah. And wasn't that fantastic? Because I mean, how else could you afford it?
This is it. Those wee things have changed, as we said before,
Those personal
Yeah,
things, trust. See,
yeah,
that's it was a kind of a trust. We did all trust each other,
yeah, yeah,
you know. And if you worked, well, the council in those days, like the banks, was a bit like the company my father went to work for. Do you know?
yeah.
They were like family. They looked after their employees. Do you know? They looked out for their.
Our shops, when my mom had a shop, a clothes shop, and there was an APRO book. So
Yeah,
I could take home 3 or 4 dresses and then come back the following week
yeah,
with
yeah,
more, you know.
yeah. It you couldn't do that now with duns or pennies. You know, yeah, it's a different way of living. And now this pandemic has created another shift. um we didn't notice the last shift happening, but I think we're noticing it and are aware of the shift now, in that when we get back to the high street, it may be quite different
Yeah,
to when we left it.
yeah,
You know, a lot of major companies are finding it much easier and financially more profitable to operate online,
yeah,
you know, um, and that's going to be the way for the future, it looks like, you know. So I don't know what's going to happen to places like shopping malls and places
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
You know, that we love to go and wander around, and it is a shift, but I think we can feel it, and I think a lot of people are nervous about it now. We never had that before. It just happened. It was
yeah,
gradual,
yeah,
but I think now it's quite, yeah, it's quite severe. Um, It'll be interesting to see what comes of the end of this
yeah.
pandemic, you know. Um, are we going to be any richer mentally for it, or are we going to have suffered? Um, and I know myself, I feel myself very lucky that I am surrounded by family. I'm surrounded by the things that I like to do.
Mhm.
Um, but if I'm left in a situation where I'm going to permanently every day be doing the things I like to do, am I going to actually be happy with that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I've
Um,
given you a new project.
Sorry?
I've given you a new project. You're gonna write your memoir. I'm
Oh,
telling you, you have a wonderful turn of phrase. I'm telling
uh,
you, there's a couple of times that I thought, oh, remember that. Remember what you just said. You have a lovely way. You do.
Oh,
I suppose I should. I hate stopping, but
oh well.
you're
Oh
wonderful.
well, it's not too bad.
Thank you so much. It was lovely.
I enjoy talking. I never say no to a chat or a cup of tea.
I'm just sorry. Well, I'd love to meet you sometime in person.
Yeah, yeah, that would be lovely. That would be lovely. Yeah.
Kathleen, thank you very, very much.
No problem. No problem. Thank you, Denise. It was lovely meeting you, actually.
I
Lovely meeting
listen
you.
to you all day. And I'm looking forward to your memoir.
I'll send you a signed copy.
Thanks a million.